My name is Lennox Rodgers. I run a charity with my wife Bally. We have been doing so for the last 14 years. Provide a service that is early intervention and crime prevention with a lot of young people, and we have helped a lot of young people who have been at risk of going to prison, risk of all sorts of criminal activity. We've worked in schools and done awareness sessions to help young people know some of the dangers that are going on in their community and how to avoid them. And that's the type of work we do at Refocus. So over the course of 14 years, we've worked with thousands of young people all across Kent and South East London, some further afield, and we are constantly seeing the fruit of that work, in that some of the young people that we worked with from years ago are now in successful jobs, who see us around and remind us of our input into their life. So it's quite rewarding to see some of the young people now. We see them change from negative behaviours into positive. We're being thanked by the families of these children because they're seeing a change at home, and it's really quite a rewarding job to see. I'd like to talk about my life, how I got into a life of crime, how it all started, what life was like before I got involved with other criminals from a young age to now, and the kind of things we did, the gangs we got involved in, and how I made the change. And just to relate my experiences to what a lot of the young people are going through today, because I'm seeing the same patterns of behaviour. I'm seeing young people who are experiencing the same problems as myself, so I'd just like to share some of that. I was born in Oxford in 1963. My dad came over to England in the 50s with some of the Windrush people, and he tried to prepare a life for the family in England. My family's background, they were farmers in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, and my grandfather was a wealthy farmer, and my father came over to kind of prepare the way and send for my mum and sisters. So my mum and dad always wanted a son. After they had their third daughter, the doctor told them that you mustn't have any more. It can be quite dangerous for you. But they were quite persistent and kept trying, and 7 girls later, still no son, and then eventually I came along. And they were so happy to have a son that they showed me off to their friends and other family. And when I was several months old, they decided to take me back to the Caribbean, to St. Vincent, and show me off to the family there. I had such a wonderful childhood then in St. Vincent. Everyone loved me. They treated me so nice. I got on with the children. They used to come to my gate when they walked past to go to school and come home, and they always interacted with me, and it was just like a dream, as what you would expect life in the Caribbean to be, and I was living the Caribbean dream. And then my mother and father took me back to England. It was a shock that, initially it was fine, but then when I started going to school, I went to sort of primary school and nursery and things, and those times were okay, because the children, they didn't see any colour at that young age. They didn't know that you're black or you're different. They just saw another child. It was when I went to junior school that it was a cultural shock, really. People were calling me names, and I didn't realise that they were insulting me. So they would say things like, "Nigger matter, wagga mind, you'll be all white in the morning." And I didn't understand the terminology. I understood that part of what they said, I would be white in the morning. And I remember thinking, well, being a bit excited that I was going to be like a chameleon and change colour. And so I was so disappointed in the morning when I was having a wash and there was no change, and I couldn't understand. And I even challenged them in the playground. And it took my friends to tell me, "Lennox, they're insulting you, they're taking the mickey out of you." And I just couldn't understand and wanted to fit in, like I fitted in the Caribbean. I just couldn't understand why people were treating me so different because of my colour. And they were very passionate about it as well, and it was hard. And so we had blacks against whites. Someone would stand in the middle of the playground and shout, "Blacks against whites," and then it was just like a scene out of Braveheart. They were at opposite ends, and there wasn't very many of us. We were made up of like Caribbean, mixed race, African, Chinese, Indian, and then we had some Irish and Scottish that came on our side. I think they just wanted a chance to fight the English. But the teachers would watch through the windows at this brawl, and we were battered. We didn't know how to fight, and it was just a mad sort of tear up in the playground. But this was like 5 days a week. It was really very hard. Over a period of time, like more than a year or so, we got better at it, but we were still outnumbered. There were gangs where I lived. I grew up with gangs, skinhead gangs. They called them boot boys. So every area had a gang, and it was quite the norm. And even some of them waited till after school to attack us. And it was a constant battle of trying to fit in, trying to avoid these gangs that just wanted to beat us up because of the colour of our skin. And we had to fight our way through. Got beaten up so many times, and we had to plan our routes. Sometimes you couldn't just go the normal way to the shops. You had to think, right, you'll go through this alley that leads you onto this road. You had to try and avoid where these gangs were hanging out. It was very difficult, very difficult time. And the neighbours that I had where I live, so thankful for them. We had an Irish neighbour, we had a Scottish and English, and they used to see what's going on, and they used to talk to me and try and tell me that not all the English people feel the same way as these people that are giving me a hard time. And they said they're just the minority, but most of the English people were very accepting of people. And so they helped me in their encouragement not to grow up with a chip on my shoulder, but to, just see these as some ignorant people who just thought that way and were taught that type of racism. But it didn't make it any easier, and it was very depressing, very damaging. And I see the same sort of thing through my work with other young people. I'm working with travellers, Eastern Europeans, Africans, people from different parts of Africa that have different cultures from other Africans, Caribbeans, and even some people in the UK who are from like North and South divide. And I'm seeing young people trying to fit in, and there's always groups of other young people who see them as different and want to give them a tough time. And I'm having to use my experiences of how I coped to help them. You know, one of the negative things I did at the time when I was going through it, I got into stealing, you know, and because things changed in my family. My parents, they went from, you know, this, what I thought was this loving family. My mum got into a Pentecostal religion, and she just turned really strict and religious, and I started getting a hard time. They started beating me for not doing what I was supposed to, and this caused me great pain in that I was getting assaulted in the community and at school. And then when I go home, you know, if I don't change my clothes when I come in, I was shouted at and sometimes beaten, especially if my clothes were damaged. You know, a young boy playing football, you rip the knee of your trousers and your mum's thinking, oh, I've got to replace that, especially if it's a tear that she can't repair. And it was just added stress for her, and it manifested itself in beatings. I got beaten with a belt and slippers and other things, and it just made me rebel more. And what I'm seeing is that some of the young people I'm working with, their parents are so strict that they're getting beaten too. I was forced to go to church like some of the African young people I'm working with, and some of the Indians who are forced to go to temple, you know, and I just didn't want to be there. I wanted to go and play football with my friends, and I'm seeing the same thing with the children. I used to hide when the church van came on a Sunday. My mum would dress me up in this little suit, and I'd know exactly when the church van's coming, and I would hide behind a wall, and they'd be looking for me and shouting my name, and I wouldn't come out. And then when they've gone, because they couldn't wait any longer, I'd come out and go and play football with my mates in this brand new suit, which wouldn't look that way afterwards. And then they would go for lunch at dinner time, and my house was locked up. And I would ask one of my neighbours who live, you know, if I could go through their house and climb over their fence and get into my garden, which I did. But then the windows were shut, and in my rebellion I would break a window and get in. And I was so hungry, and my mum had prepared this beautiful Caribbean food of rice and peas and chicken, and I'd mainly eat the meat, eat all the chicken. So sometimes she would come home and bring visitors, and there wasn't enough food because I had come in, and the punishment was almost death. They would, and what they did, my sisters helped my parents. So I'd come in the house, and they would all start shifting about. One sister would go through one door and guard that, another sister would do the same with another, and I was trapped. And then I would get a beating from my mum and dad, and this was a regular thing. And I'm seeing with the young people that some of those young people are forced to go to church. Their parents are very strict, and they're beaten. Even the Indians and the travellers and the Eastern Europeans, some of their parents are very strict with them. Some are not being forced into religion, but they are beaten, and they're taking their frustrations and their anger out, and they're taking it to the streets and taking it out with other young people. When they go to school, they rebel against the teachers and their peer groups. They're fighting, and you know, the beatings are sometimes toughening them up. You know, it's tougher for some of the girls, because the girls are like second-class citizens. They have to learn to keep house, cook, clean, and look after the men in some of the cultures. And their feelings are not listened to. I was working with a 13-year-old traveller girl who saw a lot of domestic violence, was beaten as well, was bullied by her brothers, and it was really terrible. She had all this emotions that were bottled up, and they called her at 13, even though she didn't have a boyfriend, they called her a slag and things, and they really mistreated. It was really sad. It's really heartbreaking to listen to some of the children's stories, and what helps them is someone with lived experience who has been there and done it and can sort of relate to them in some way. And they've never had that, or they're not having it, and it helps them where they're at. It's really been a valuable asset, as hard as it's been to have this experience. It is so relevant today with the work we're doing. When I share about my upbringing and having been sexually abused as a child and then raped at the age of 12, I'm identifying with some of these young people's issues. It's such a relief for them, to have someone that's been there and done it, rather than to talk to someone that doesn't know how it feels.